Good afternoon, Ohio State fans, and really any college football fans or any sport fans who decided to tune in for the Bucknuts happy hour. We are here in, I think it's week 8 of the college football season. Man, it flies by, doesn't it? We're going to be talking about Ohio State, Iowa, the matchup this weekend between the Buckeyes and the Hawkeyes. We're going to look ahead a little bit to the rest of this season. The Buckeyes obviously coming off that off weekend, perfectly lines that up nicely for first half, second half, and how we expect that to go. I'm Patrick Murphy. If you've done this with us throughout the season, the Bucknuts Happy Hour, you know this already, but if you feel like it, grab yourself a drink. I've got a, what do I have here? A Bell's, I think it's a Bell's Two Hearted that I grabbed out of the fridge. Get the weekend started. It's a Buckeye football weekend. So we're going to kick things off. We've got David Eichelholt, here from our 247 site Hawkeye Insider. David, thanks for joining us. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy week to hop on here and join the happy hour.
Yeah, man, always good talking to you. I appreciate you having me on, and I'm with you. But when you watch the Iowa offense, I think you need something a little bit stronger than beer. So, it'll be interesting. I think most of us know how the results of the game is going to go, but there's still a lot of intriguing storylines, I think, heading into this one.
Absolutely. And if you have any questions, if you're watching this live, feel free to throw comments about Iowa, Big Ten, whatever, into the chat here, and we'll try and answer those throughout the show. If you have anything for David, get him in while he's on here for the next little bit. You mentioned needing something a little bit stronger to watch Iowa. I had a buddy ask me the other day if I was getting bored covering Ohio State football because every game has been the same. He's like, I think your stories are like basically the same after every game. I'm going to flip that question to you. Obviously, fans who are watching this know Iowa's got a great defense, but that offense, as I think you kind of were alluding to there, makes it hard to watch. What is it like to cover this team this season? 7-3 game where they don't score a touchdown. Some of those, kind of take us through what it's like to cover this team.
It's been a very weird season. Like you mentioned, the 7-3 with the 2 safeties and the field goal against South Dakota State. The next week against Iowa State, bad weather. I thought Iowa State did everything in their power to lose that game and to give Iowa the game, essentially. Iowa State ended up pulling it out. And then the Nevada game, which, you might be rolling your eyes to, but that was, I think, about a 7-hour game with all the weather delays. There was one where it was, I think 95 minutes was the second delay. They went back out there. Nevada ran a botched screenplay that was, I think, like a 4-yard loss. And then another lightning strike got hit. So it was another 55 minutes or so. And the first thing I'm thinking is you had 95 minutes to draw up a play, and that's what you decided to run on third down. But it's been a very weird season. I think there's a lot of pent-up frustration. But, Patrick, to be honest, I think it's just there are issues that were covered up last year that are just surfacing now. Okay. Iowa won 10 games last year, but the offense was much more opportunistic. But, Iowa was 121st in total offense last year, 114th in completion percentage. I think 117th in red zone offense. And Iowa is just not generating as many interceptions as they did last year as well. They had 25 picks last year, set up Iowa's offense really, really well. And now it's just defenses get great stops, but Iowa just can't move the football. Their time of possession's awful. The offensive line is very young. I think they're going to be really good in due time. But it's just so many variety issues I think have just become so glaring now. It's like I said, it's just a very complex, very weird team. And I almost feel bad for the defense because we have to ask them, is there any frustration in the locker room between you guys and the offense? And the first thing they'll say back is, we could have held them to 6 points. We could have pitched a shutout. And I'm like, it's almost like we're gaslighting this defense, right?
Yeah.
It's crazy. And they're great. But I think it's definitely being overshadowed by what's turned into a huge laughingstock that is the Iowa offense.
We've had a couple people in the comment section here watching live saying it's too early to drink. I think that's one of the things that's nice about being a sports writer is it's never too early to drink. As long as you do it responsibly. And, we're recording this 3 o'clock my time, 2 o'clock your time. So it's Friday afternoon. I don't know. Happy hour's coming. Another comment from Mike Schaefer. If Pat drinks a beer for every Iowa point scored this Saturday, is he drunk afterward? Probably not.
Probably not.
A lot of beer. So even if Iowa were to score some touchdowns, you can't hang out with Hellwagon and Biddle and not have some beers.
Oh,
And
that's true.
I mean that in a good way, not like
Yeah.
tough to deal with. You've experienced it before when we've all been together.
Yeah. No, that's the thing about being a sports writer though too, is people don't realize like the Friday nights before the games and stuff like that on the road trips. I mean, Big Ten Media Days, it's a blast just to, be with those group of people. And it's a very unique industry in a lot of ways. But I certainly think, whether it be, your site, whether it be, other networks, whether it be other journalists, it's a very cool kind of just I won't say a brotherhood, but you kind of get my vibe about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got to hang out at Big Ten Media Days this past year. That was a great night. Some stories you can't tell on things like this, but yeah, just know we have our fun when we work hard, play hard.
That's true.
Yeah, let's get back to the game. I think you kind of alluded to it with your statement there, but you also were kind of telling me before we started recording. What's the vibe in your eyes in Iowa City and around this fan base just about this game? Because as you mentioned, I think we all kind of know how it's going to go. So what are Iowa fans looking, and contrast that to maybe the Michigan game? Because I think that's where Ohio State fans and Michigan fans, they're going to compare opponents, right? Because that game at the end of the year is going to be a huge one probably. So how is it feeling before the Michigan game? How are Iowa fans feeling now?
I think the temperature about this team right now is probably at its highest point since the end of the 2014 season when Iowa finished 4-8. A lot of people wanted Kirk Ferentz fired. I thought he was going to get fired at that time. And then, he made some big adjustments. The hashtag new Kirk became a thing, made some adjustments, went 12-0 in the regular season. But, now I think it's very interesting. There's a lot of different dynamics, obviously with his son being the offensive coordinator, with continuing to double, triple down on the starting quarterback that is Spencer Petras.
Right.
I think the vibe before the season, I picked Iowa to beat Michigan. I thought that was a game that I assumed Iowa's offense was going to take a step forward. I thought it was going to be a night game. And it's very funny because I believe the two games before the Michigan game were night games. Michigan was not a night game. And then there was another night game the week after. So every game around it was a night game. Then you had the 11 a.m. against Michigan.
Those damn big noon kickoff games.
Oh, dude. Well, it's basically just the Michigan pregame. I mean, they're going to go to like 6 or 7 different Michigan games this year with the big noon.
Yeah.
But
Big Ten champions, they seem to do that.
It's nuts. But to answer your question, I think it's pretty doom and gloom right now. I think there are still a lot of fans that were very interested in the Iowa-Michigan game. I think there are still some vibes that they maybe could rattle J.J. McCarthy a little bit more. But then Michigan goes out there, scores on 4 of their first 5 drives, which is very, very rare against Phil Parker's defenses. Iowa adjusted well in the second half, really held them at bay. But I think when you look at the Ohio State game, I think I told you this off camera, I don't know how many Iowa fans are going to watch this game. I really don't. And I think it's very rare for either Iowa writers and Iowa fans to really brush off this game or not give Iowa any shot whatsoever. But I can't tell you anybody that's giving Iowa any sort of realistic shot. And when you look at the on-the-field product, you really can't blame them. So to compare the Michigan-Ohio State aspect, people are going to watch Michigan versus Iowa. I don't think there's going to be that many Iowa fans that end up watching this game because they know what they're kind of expecting right now.
Well, that kind of goes into Sue's question. She asked, will many Iowa fans travel to the shoe or not? I think you kind of answered that there. If they're not even watching on TV, I'm sure there'll be a section, but I can't imagine it will be what it would be if this were some of the bigger games that we've seen between these teams in the past.
If Iowa was 5-1, they would have went.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. I mean, if they would have been able to beat Illinois, who's somehow top of the Big Ten West right now, I think without a doubt the most complete team in the Big Ten West. Who would have thought that at the beginning of the year? And if Iowa would have beaten Iowa State, I think they would have traveled well. But, on the flip side of that, Patrick, even if Iowa had beaten those teams, I still think the temperature of the fan base is crazy high because the offense still sucks. Even with a 5-1 record, it still sucks. So I think some people might go just for the experience. But that'd really be about it. People would go for the city and the horseshoe. I don't think people are really going to watch Iowa.
Well, you referenced Brian Ferentz earlier. Shane asked, if it wasn't Kirk Ferentz's son, do you truly believe he still has his job as the offensive coordinator? What's your vibe on that unique situation?
I mean, Patrick, I've made this point to you, I think, a couple of times. I've said it. If his name's, Brian Williams, Brian Smith, does he have a job? No. And you could argue, and I would have argued, that Iowa should have made significant offseason changes to the offense last year after the 121st ranked offense, even with the 10 games. And, I did ask Kirk Ferentz prior to the bye week, and, Patrick, I'm sure you've seen the clip. It ended up going pretty viral. But I asked him about potentially making midseason coaching changes and read off some statistics to him. And his first defense was, well, we won 10 games last year. I don't know if you know that. We've had a lot of success since 2015. And, I think in hindsight, I think Kirk probably regrets that. I think he knew in the moment he kind of messed up, but given the frustration level of that game, it's hard to keep your emotions in check at times. But Shane, to answer your question, I don't think he'd still have his job. And, to put it bluntly, I'll be surprised if he's Iowa's offensive coordinator next year. I don't think Kirk's going to have to fire him. Kirk technically can't fire him because Gary Barta is his boss due to nepotism laws. But I could see a very real possibility that Brian Ferentz steps aside on his own accord and takes a different job.
Interesting. All right. I was under, just from reading your stuff, reading other people's stuff, I was under the impression that he may never go anywhere, kind of like Ferentz, just because of that. But
he's got a lot of connections with Bill Belichick. Remember, he was the tight ends coach for New England a couple of years, and Bill O'Brien is a very, very close friend to him. So, Bill O'Brien moves on somewhere.
Right.
That's pure speculation, but it would not surprise me whatsoever.
Bill O'Brien's at Alabama, right?
I believe, yes.
I think he is.
I think he's the offensive coordinator.
Yeah. An interesting question from Mike Schaefer here. I'm curious on your opinion here. Will the addition of USC and UCLA help a program like Iowa recruit better? I assume you mean being able to go out to the West Coast more frequently. I imagine that'll happen quite a bit. Or is there a fear that they will just get pushed further down the Big Ten standings when those two teams come to the Big Ten? What do you think about that?
I think that's a really interesting question. I spent a lot of time thinking about that. I think that it's very weird to me because Iowa's actually recruiting better and better every single year. They've been on a very upward trajectory. They have the nation's #1 offensive tackle next year in Caden Proctor. Granted, it's a rare instance where he resides in Des Moines, but he had offers from Alabama. He had offers from everywhere under the sun. Same with Xavier Wampa, who Ohio State fans, I'm sure, are pretty familiar with, made a Final Three. I think it opens the door for Iowa to be successful down there, but I'd also counter that point. It's all going to depend on what Iowa's investment in NIL is going to be. Yeah. I mean, that's just the way college football is trending. And if USC continues their upward trajectory, I don't know how much Iowa's really going to try to take over in that area. But the other side of that argument is, and I use the same logic for Florida-born players. Would you rather have a top 3 prospect in a normal year from Nebraska, from Iowa, or would you take a top 30 prospect or top 40 prospect from a California, from a Texas, from a Georgia, from a Florida?
Sure.
And those guys aren't going to be the ones gaining the huge offers from Blue Bloods the majority of the time. Right. So I think it creates a unique circumstance for Iowa to really go into Florida. Abdul Hodge has some Florida connections. Liddell Betts, who's Iowa's running back coach, has some Florida connections. So I think Iowa's put more of a priority right now on getting back down to Florida, getting back down into Texas. And they've obviously utilized the East Coast connections as well, some of their key players being there. But as far as the West Coast, Iowa rarely goes out there. Ironically enough, Spencer Petras is from California. So, he's the only California-born player on the roster to my knowledge. But I think it's an interesting question. I think it's going to depend on NIL, and it's going to depend on how carefully can Iowa play. Are they going to try to go kind of out of their element and get those top 5, top 10 kids, or are they going to get those under the radar players in those talent-riddled states? And that's assuming Iowa can continue its developmental program. I mean, that's going to be the key piece to all this, right? So I think, as Kirk gets older, this is a very trying time in college athletics in general and changing. The way Kirk Ferentz ends his tenure is going to set up how successful Iowa football can be in the future.
And I think this question, you could ask this question about all Big Ten teams. I mean, Ohio State has done pretty well given the location of the Big Ten out in California. Michigan has some California, but most of the Big Ten isn't recruiting that far out regularly. Yeah. So now that you're going to be out there once a year, twice, depending on how this schedule all breaks out, it will be interesting because, that becomes part of your footprint a little bit, as crazy as that is to think because of, how far away Southern California is. And I know I was just out there and it is quite a trip to get out there.
Subtle flex, Patrick.
Yeah. Well, it was all, and my flight, and I missed my flight on the way home. So it wasn't the greatest. But
here's the thing about adding UCLA and USC. Look, as a sports writer, I'm not going to complain about leaving Iowa to go to LA for 3 days in November. All right. Like I'm pretty excited about it. I'm good with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and look, the Rose Bowl trips out there have always been good. And yeah, it's not a bad place to go, especially as it gets colder in the Midwest and whatnot. But
yeah,
looking at Iowa's roster, somebody, I think it was I don't remember if I saw it on Twitter or our message boards the other day, asked about the number of future NFL picks or NFL players on this Iowa roster. Now, obviously, you can't project what's going to happen, but if you were to name some guys that are most likely to be, playing in the NFL once their Iowa career is done, who are some of those guys that you think are surefire NFL players?
Jack Campbell, number one. I think I'm very intrigued by Jack Campbell and where he could go in the draft because personally, and I'm biased, I watch every game. I think he's a late first round, early second round pick. He's 6'5", 248, tackling machine, and his sideline to sideline speed is tremendous for a guy that size. I think Sam Laporta's a surefire NFL pick. I think he has to clean up some of the drop issues he's had throughout his career, but we've seen what he can do. I actually think Luke Lachey is a future NFLer too. I really do. There were a lot of questions about his blocking ability when he got to Iowa, and I think he's done a great job in progressing in that. I think he's uber athletic.
Yeah.
He's got very high upside. I think he's going to get a real breakout chance next season once Laporta goes to the NFL. Let me think about some other guys. I think Riley Moss, hurt himself coming back. He just hasn't had the year that many of us expected, but he's still going to be an NFL cornerback. Cooper DeJean is probably one of the most underrated defensive players in America. And he's from, I call it Alphabet Soup High School, 1A, small town, 3 towns combined high school. But he was actually the Adidas National Player of the Year, 2019. 2020. 4-sport athlete, uber fast, uber athletic, 3 picks this year. He actually got offered to play quarterback at Virginia. So with Iowa's quarterback troubles, all Iowa fans are saying, hey, throw him in at quarterback. But
of course, right.
And we, as media members, we've questioned maybe throw him in a Wildcat or do something with that. Lucas Van Ness, defensive lineman. He's going to be a top 3 round draft pick. He's 6'5", 275 with a crazy 6-pack. His teammates call him Hercules. It's unbelievable. I think Noah Shannon will get picked up. I mean, if just off the top of my head, Xavier Wampa is obviously going to be an NFL guy as well. There's probably double-digit guys on the roster right now comfortably. I'd be like, yeah, they're going to get drafted, or yeah, they'll at least get a shot in the NFL.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just, the top name programs, the Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia's, they think that so much of the NFL talent comes from there. And obviously it does, but, there's 7 rounds in the NFL draft and 30 plus picks in each round. So there's certainly guys from programs like Iowa. And I feel like that doesn't get put out there as much as, when you talk about some of these other schools, maybe just because they're not first round picks, but plenty of talented Iowa players in the NFL right now.
You can argue. Tyler Linderbaum, I think, is going to be the best center in the NFL at some point in his career. Tristan Wirfs is going to get paid, and then Brandon Scherf. If you look at, it's funny just because the way Iowa's offensive line is right now and how much it's sort of struggled. You look at the NFL and you think there's 3. You could argue 3 of the top 15 linemen probably are out of Iowa. Linderbaum not there yet. You still need to see it. just on in a more game basis, but I don't think he's allowed a sack this season. I think he's only allowed like one pressure, and that Ravens offense with Lamar Jackson is sort of being revitalized. But obviously with George Kittle, Noah Fant, TJ Hawkinson, I mean, Iowa, I think, is top 12 or top 14 with most players on NFL roster. I think they're at about 38 right now, I want to say.
Yeah, I reminded a friend of mine the other day. We were watching an NFL game a couple weeks ago. I think it was Noah Fant. It was either Noah Fant or TJ Hawkinson. And I was like, oh, yeah, that was one of the tight ends that killed Ohio State in 2017. And he just like turned and looked at me and was like, why did you bring that up?
Like pain.
I don't know. Yeah, it was like, I mean, it was like that. Those guys had really good games.
What play was so incredible, and not to reminisce too much on that, but it's just sort of, how am I supposed to phrase? It's just like the one play that sort of symbolized the game or summed it up. It was, I can't remember the defensive lineman for Ohio State. Very, very good player. Wrapped around Nate Stanley's leg. Couldn't get him down. Stanley just stood tall. Took an absolute shot while throwing it. But I think he threw it to Hawkinson in the end zone.
Yeah, I do remember that. All right, David, I'll wrap you up with this. If Iowa is going to hang around in this game, you asked me a similar question when I was on your podcast yesterday. What has to happen to keep the Hawkeyes in this game? However long we're talking here, but just to make this a more interesting game than I think a lot of people expect. What do you think has to happen from the Iowa side of things?
The one, I think, is going to be an interesting game just from the stance of Ohio State's offense versus Iowa's defense, because I've told you Iowa's defense is better than the statistics even show, simply because they've had to be on the football field longer, just because the offense can't sustain any drives. I think they have 5 drives of 60 yards or more all season long. I mean, it's bad, but I think Iowa getting a defensive touchdown, creating turnovers. I mean, if you want to sort of put a bad vibe in the building, get your team jacked up, you have to get a pick six. You have to force a fumble deep in Ohio State's territory. And CJ Stroud, for the most part, has avoided those mistakes this year. But I think Iowa is due for a couple picks. I'm not saying it's going to come against Stroud, but they've been pretty quiet the last couple of weeks. Doesn't typically happen for Phil Parker coach defenses. But if Iowa's going to make this game, if it's going to be interesting, Iowa needs to stop Ohio State early. I think that the dam's going to break in the second half. By now, how much does it break? I'm not really sure yet. But Iowa's going to need to get an early turnover, whether it be a pick six, force fumble, just do everything they can basically to put Iowa's offense in a position to say, here, literally do anything. Like, let us sit, let us rest. And, it's a lot of pressure to put on the defense. But the other side of it, too, is Torrey Taylor is the best punter in America. And Iowa's really used him as a 12th defender in a sense, because he's probably the best coffin corner kicker in the country. So, even if Iowa's offense gets stopped, it's almost a win for them if they can pin Ohio State back deep. I think that will really allow Phil Parker to get a little bit more risky if you get them back deep in their territory. Iowa's generated 2 safeties this year, but it's all, like I said, it's almost unfair how much pressure there is on Iowa's defense to do what they do game in and game out just to even make it competitive.
It's interesting you mentioned the punting game, because Ryan Day said going into the off weekend, return game in general was something that they were looking at to clean up. And then the other day he mentioned possible personnel changes on special teams. So I'll be interested to see what they do in terms of trying to generate more, because they've been horrendous on both kick and punt returns so far this year. But David, thanks for jumping on with us. I do appreciate it. I hope you enjoy the rest of your fireball there. And hopefully that'll help you get through the game on Saturday.
Well, we'll see what happens, buddy. But no, I appreciate you having me on. It's always good catching up with you, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks again. And that was David Eichholt from our Iowa site at 247 Sports. He does great work. They all do great work over there. I know I say that every week about the guys we have on, but that's because I truly mean it. If you're looking for insight on the opponent, I do always recommend you checking out the other 247 Sports sites. That network is just awesome. It's one of the reasons I love working for this company, because you have access to stuff like that. And, if you're looking for recruiting stuff, it's there. If you're looking for team stuff, it's there. It's all really well done. And the Iowa site does a great job, even though it's a smaller group, but they really do. So now we're going to look ahead a little bit because I think we all know how this game's going to go. It's one of those you can kind of pick your score if you want. Maybe not as much because of Iowa's defense, but I want to look ahead to the second half of the season. And you know him by now if you've been paying attention. Timmy Hall from the Buckeye Show, 97.1 The Fan. Tim, you keep agreeing to jump on here for the happy hour. Someday we'll do it where you can actually partake a little bit. But
yeah,
I do appreciate you jumping on. I think I said at the beginning that this was a Bell's Too Hard. It's a Bell's Oberon that I'm drinking today. It feels warmer out, so I decided to go with something a little
gotcha.
summer. Yeah, and I have to start drinking early because my girlfriend is having a Taylor Swift album release party at our house this evening. So I have to drink early, so I'm ready for that, but not too much so that I can go to bed and be okay tomorrow. How you doing, though?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on again, Pat. Yeah, the Taylor Swift album, that's all the rage today. By the way, you don't have any kind of Woody Hayes type of ideology where I'm not going to drink any kind of brew from that state up north because you're sipping on a Bell's right now.
Honestly, that didn't even cross my mind. No, I drink the beer that I think tastes good. And I bought it in Ohio, if that makes you feel better. But yeah,
I don't know. It's about where it originated from, though. I mean, it's basically an import. Is what we're talking about.
Do they even? I mean, like I know a lot of places don't even brew where they. I think we talked on the show the other day about Budweiser, and that's not even exclusively brewed in Missouri anymore. It's everywhere now. I don't know how Bell's does it, but no, I didn't think about that. I will consider that for the future shows. But let's dig into this team a little bit. Last week, we looked backwards during the off week. This week, I want to look forwards. I think we know how the Iowa game is going to go. But aside from the Michigan game, and I think I know where you'll go with this, but is there a game that stands out the most to you about on the second half of the season that you're either concerned about or intrigued for or anything like that?
Sorry, Pat, their connection right there. Are you asking about, I caught most of that question. Was it about the game on the schedule that you're looking forward to the most for the rest of the regular season?
Yeah, just something that stands out. Aside from Michigan, we all know that one already.
Right.
Whether it be trap game, interesting matchup, just something that stands out to you over the second half of the season in terms of the games.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always going to start with Penn State, right? Like there are things that we can find interesting within these games. That's part of what you have to look to keep it fun, right? For an Ohio State football fan, when the average margin of victory has been somewhere, between 30 and 40 points. So you got to look a little bit deeper, right? And just when you going up against a big program on the road like Penn State, so what if it's not a night game and it's not their whiteout? Are you telling me that, Penn State's end all be all is, if we can't play the game in prime time, then we don't have a real great shot to win? On our side, we kind of know that is a part truth, but
yeah,
whether that's going to be at night or during the day, Ohio State's going to be probably a 17 to a 20-point favorite opening up on the road at Penn State, and that is kind of crazy. It's also crazy that we've seen this line in the Iowa game balloon to 30 points when I just, heard your guy on from 24/7 Sports there. That was some good stuff. It's a great defense. It's a top 10, top 5 defense, and yet Ohio State's favored by 30 points because their offense is that atrocious. It's that bad. So looking to, if you like doing that, we can't bet in Ohio until January 1st, but the lines in these games clearly are points of interest to see if the Buckeyes have what it takes to cover some of these big gaudy spreads that they've been given. So we will look at that. But going back to the Penn State game, it's just the fact remains James Franklin, has a win over Ohio State, but it is just one win and 2 other really, really close games. Yeah. And it's just one of those things where he sat there after one of those brutal losses and kind of told his fan base and told everybody that we were done being great, And his point being is that we're not going to be great anymore. We're going to up it to elite. Like we're going to up it to like Ohio State. We're tired of being, 9-10 win Penn State, being right there, right in the thick of it. But then, maybe a bad fourth down call. Some of that's James Franklin's fault, some bad coaching decisions late in those games. But it hasn't been that way. They've been just a 500 Big Ten program for these last 2 seasons. So you really do look into that one, because Ohio State's obviously so good and they're a much better football team here. It's not even what I would consider a roadblock. I guess it's more of that, boy, that's sad for Penn State that this is sort of an afterthought type of game, and they're going to be ranked going into it. I understand that, but with the way they looked against Michigan was just awful. It kind of reminded you of just that deflating feeling of how the Buckeyes, of how we looked against Michigan last year. And if our beliefs are in line that this Ohio State team is a contender, is a different football team, then they should have a lot to show. And you wonder about that thing called pride. Is Penn State going to flush that one? And are they going to play more physical? Are they going to be more up for that football game because they don't want a repeat embarrassment type performance that they had 3 weeks ago against Michigan? That's really it, man. Yeah, if you cancel out that game at the end, that's kind of the thing that I'm really looking at right now as a Buckeye fan. This one coming up next week on the road.
Yeah, I would be interested in how that game is different if Penn State went into Michigan last weekend and won. That changes the complexion of it, right?
Very. Don't you think?
Right. They're a top 10 team probably. It also changes the game at the end of the season a little bit, but the one that I thought you were going to say Penn State. So the one that I will be interested in other than those two is at Maryland, November 19th. Yeah. Just because I think Maryland has some talent, first of all, but you're going on the road the week before that rivalry game. You want revenge in that rivalry game. I think that will really test Ryan Day's competitive stamina thing that he keeps preaching. Can you focus on Maryland, knowing Michigan's right around the corner? And, how do the Buckeyes handle that? I think they'll win at Maryland, but I could see that game being closer than you probably need it to be, just because of that, if the Buckeyes aren't the focus team that they have been so far this year. So that's another one I think will be interesting coming up here. And obviously, we've always seen this team play on the road once, and that usually doesn't affect the Buckeyes too much, but it is something. Real quick, Tim, Yakov asked if the P on your hat is for Patrick or is it for something else? I think it's clearly for Patrick, right?
for Patrick, or I get Pirates a lot for this one.
Yeah.
There's a guy that lives in my neighborhood, and I have this hat in almost 5 or 6 different colors right now. I just want to tell you up front, if I'm sporting my baseball team, I am not one of those guys that's going off of the wall at Lids that has 65 different colors. They do that for the Yankees hats. Yeah. Your team colors are your team colors. Maybe if you want to go one alternate one, like if your team has an alternate jersey, that's fine. You can buy the hat if it's like one different color, but the pinks, the greens for St. Patrick's Day, I'm not in on that. Like, your team colors are your team colors. This is purely a Puma. That's it. Okay. It's just a golf hat. It's like this Puma. It'll sound like an advertisement, but it's like a Puma 110. They should be paying me. I've been wearing enough of these hats, but they're super comfortable for a golfer. You got to have something with a good flex band, and I just like the profile, like the fit. I can't do dad hats, and I can't do like those baseball 5950 bucket hats because those sit too high. But yeah, that's a long we talked a long time about my hat now, and that was my fault. I know.
All good. If we're looking end of the season, who would you put as the most likely offensive, defensive MVP of this team?
Oh man, I mean, are we excluding obvious characters again? Are we?
No, you can pick whoever you want
here. They all fly, so we could just take the easy road and say C.J. Stroud.
Sure. I mean, those receivers have to catch the balls.
I'm no offense to Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka, Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson, everything that they do, but the machine starts with CJ Stroud. You could actually we could have a conversation about what's more important for this football team when we talk about the health of the offensive line. And I think that's been a huge deal for CJ's success and having all, I mean, he's barely been touched, Pat, like this whole year. What's he been sacked 4 times? And we probably have to go and pull up the film on those 4 sacks and see if they were really, even that important, or if he was just holding the ball for too long, maybe just because they're blowing somebody out by 2 touchdowns already. And he's just maybe waiting to see if a crossing route comes clean, and he probably wouldn't have held onto the ball if it was in a different, game situation. But I mean, I think the line has been very, very huge. But if we're going to call this an individual type of thing, we got a guy in the Heisman race. I mean, we got a Heisman front runner. He's been electrifying to watch, and I can't wait to see him dial it up here for the last 6 regular season games. What about you?
I would say the same thing. I figured that's where we would go. I just had to ask real quick. Does he win it? Does he win the Heisman?
Yes. I've been
in health, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that we could say that for everybody, but he's winning this thing. And I've just sort of felt it all season. I just, from even after the Notre Dame game, you got past it. You just needed to win. And for the numbers that he put up in his last game against Utah, you might have thought, oh, what a sluggish start for someone that's going to be in on the Heisman. But it was a really efficient game, and he was put into a position in that football game where he had some pressure, and first games are like that. You got the prime time. It's a top 5 matchup, and he had to throw some really good footballs to the sideline a few times to get some first downs. And the numbers really weren't all that bad to have over, 230 passing yards with a good completion percentage, 2 touchdowns through the air, no interceptions, no turnovers. So that was great. I've just felt that he was going to win it pretty much since that Notre Dame game. And he's just had a different, you've been around him a lot and go to all the media availabilities. He's just a different kind of dude this year. He's wired a little bit different. NIL has maybe done something, but I think this guy just has full belief in his abilities and what his future holds and where he's going. And he's not too cocky. He just has a good sort of sense of realism about who he is and what he can do. And I've loved it. I've loved every bit of it.
Yeah, I agree. I said before the season, look, there was going to be a lot of pressure on Bryce Young to repeat, and you always get looked at differently when you come back for that second year. We've seen it with a number of guys going back to Tim Tebow, and I thought CJ Stroud would get better and, continue to get better throughout the season. I think that's what you've seen. So yeah, I agree with you. I think he does take it home. Let me ask you this. This is something.
Wait a minute. What about defense?
Oh yeah.
What about defense? Because I saw a commenter on there too, and I agree with the picks. I do. I think Tommy. We've talked a lot about Tommy Eichenberg. We've talked a lot about just the 2 linebackers, the way Steele and Tommy have played all season long, and it might not be the guy that I would have pegged before the season. I was a guy sitting here thinking that Jack Sawyer was going to go and put up some stupid numbers.
Yeah.
Stupid numbers. I think a lot of people felt that. Yeah, you too. A lot of people felt that in training camp, and it doesn't mean he's had a bad football season. It's just numbers can be hard to get. It's a new scheme they're working in. They could start to fall here in these last 6 games as well, but I do think it'd be tougher, even if the numbers do start to come, for a JT Tuimoloau or a Jack Sawyer, some of the sexier edge rusher positions where you get the pressures and the sacks and the TFLs. Tommy has just been such a rock steady player back there that I think it would be tough to catch at this point. If he leads the team in tackles, and he's just been such a leader, he's just been such a reliable player, and you need that. You need that on defense. You're nothing if you don't have a middle linebacker you can trust.
Yeah, I agree. The other guy that I would throw in there, and the numbers may not be there, but I would say Ronnie Hickman. It would be in that conversation. I just think he does so much. If we're talking MVP, most valuable player, if you're not, I think when I think of that, I don't necessarily think of the stats, though that tends to be how the award's given out. But value to this defense, I mean, obviously he had the team lead in tackles last year. Hasn't had to do that because the defense is so much better this year. but he moved positions. He's playing a different safety role. He's still a leader on this defense. I really like Ronnie Hickman, but I agree with you. Assuming Tommy Eichenberg continues to play as well as he played the first 6 games, he's probably the guy. I've been asked this a few times, and I think it's an interesting question. The bigger impact coming back from injury, assuming both guys come back from injury here, whether it be this week, next week, relatively soon, Jackson Smith-Njigba or Jordan Hancock. And, the question obviously comes because Ohio State's cornerback play has not been up to par. And I look at it and think, okay, you know what you're getting in Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's probably the best receiver in the country coming back. But the fact that you even have that question is an indictment on what the cornerbacks have done. Because let's be honest, aside from hearing Ryan Day and some of the coaches talk about Jordan Hancock, no one has any idea what he's going to look like. I mean, it's not, he's a sophomore who hardly played last year. I think it's an interesting question because I think he could make a bigger impact just because the receivers are so good, but we don't know that. I mean, the practices we saw, he looked good, but he didn't stand out to me as like, oh yeah, that's the best cornerback in the nation, like Jackson Smith-Njigba has done. So I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, and the other thing too, with Jackson Smith-Njigba coming back, none of us really know how close he is to 100%, right? And we're not really being given that intel if he has waited officially until he's 100% to go back in. He might not be up to that speed and that agility that he had when we saw him in the Utah game, but they've medically cleared him and they've told him you're safe right now and nothing that you do out there is going to re-injure this. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he is going to be as ultra fast and as ultra quick the last time he played in an actual Big Ten football game. So there's that point with Jackson. And then there's the point about how good the wide receivers have been. But I will not sit here and say that it is going to be a bad thing, even for 85% Jackson Smith-Njigba, who is trending upward, to come on back. Because whatever we've seen from Julian Fleming as a number 3, and no offense to him, it still pales in comparison to what Jackson Smith-Njigba's top line is. I mean, this is a guy who in one football season proved he could be basically a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. And I do think he needed to come back this season and maybe play a little bit more on the outside, just recycle and repeat, just show me more, right? Because playing through injuries is a part of being a pro that you want to sign to a massive second contract when it comes to that, or if you want to take them way high in the first round, that type of thing. So I'm kind of following you for all the things I'm saying about Jackson. Again, I'm excited to have him, welcoming him back with open arms, no doubt. But Jordan Hancock has been just sort of a mystery player. And every time, we've talked about Burke before, I know, on this pod, and then you've stuck up for him by saying, when you do get that bird's eye view, only the bad plays get looked at, and we gloss over a lot of the plays where the ball is not thrown in his direction. But every time someone gets beat on an island there, a cornerback, you just wonder, all right, well, who's the next guy? Like cycle in the backup. Let's because he might be a bona fide starter someday at Ohio State. And Jordan Hancock obviously has been one of those guys that has gotten a lot of talk, and would love to see him healthy and would love to get him back.
Yeah, and I think Jordan Hancock is going to be very good. I mean, he was highly rated coming out of high school. We just haven't seen him yet because Denzel Burke was the one who enrolled early and got going. Tim, I know you got to get out here, so I'll leave you with this very simple question before you go. Do the Buckeyes win the national championship this year?
Oh, gosh, Pat.
You can just say yes or no. You don't have to go into detail.
No, I can't, man. Yes, okay, yes. Fine, yes. Sure.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready. I wasn't coming out with that just yet.
Yeah,
what a question, Pat. Great question.
Dave Biddle and I did a Twitter Spaces the other day and got asked that. So I felt like I needed to throw it at you. I also said yes.
Let me guess. You said yes, and Dave said yes.
Yeah. I mean, as of what we've seen, I think this is the best team in the country from what we've seen so far this year.
Can I put my confidence meter on that as of today, though?
Yeah, go ahead.
As of right here today, I'm only at like a 38% confidence meter. Like, I'm not a big,
All right.
I'm not like a dude that's walking around town just, hey, end the season now. Buckeyes are winning the national championship. I mean, last time I looked, it was 2014, the last time we won one. And we get to this feeling a lot of years where it's, yeah, we're doing it. It's our title to lose. Just because you're in a position and you feel like you're the best team, it does not mean you are just winning the national championship. So my confidence meter is not yet to the 50% line in that, even though I answered the question yes, because you put me on the spot like the Patrick Murphy that you are.
Yeah, well, that's what I do when I can. Usually you're ready for these things.
It's the drinking that did that.
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed, but this is actually my second beer.
Well, why not make it 3?
Yeah, well, like I said, Taylor Swift party, so I've got to be ready.
I got a bottle of wine from the Blue Jackets out there. I should crack that open.
There you go. I saw that. I think it was T-Bone put that on Twitter yesterday. So it must be nice to be you guys and get all this free stuff.
Very generous. It pays to be the partners.
Yeah.
Of the Jackets.
All right. I know you've got stuff to do over there at the Fan. I will. I assume I'll talk to you later. We haven't discussed this yet.
We'll talk to you. Yeah, we'll talk to you later. Yeah,
I'll be on the Buckeye show later this evening. Tim, thanks for coming on. I will see you I'll talk to you in a little bit. That was Tim Hall from 97.1 The Fan. Love having Tim on. I'm glad he's agreed to be a part of this pretty much every week whenever he can make it work with our timing. So fantastic dude, knows his stuff. A lot of fun to talk to. And, he loves to talk about the Buckeyes. And it gives a different perspective because Tim didn't grow up in Columbus. He didn't go to Ohio State. He moved here for the job and has really given, I think just a different flair to kind of the media scene, because a lot of people, myself included, spent at least some of their growing up in Ohio, in Columbus, went to Ohio State, whatever it may be. So I think having someone like Tim there is valuable. I want to answer a couple questions or comments that were thrown out there during the earlier part of the show. This won't do well for the people on the podcast, but Yakov asked, Pat, the picture over my shoulder, that is my dog growing up. My dad painted that picture, actually. I won't go into huge detail because I know the people listening on the podcast version can't see it. But yes, that is my childhood dog that my dad painted. And so when I got a big boy residence a while back, I was like, I want that picture. And so I brought it into my home. And there it is. Another one, more Ohio State focused. Bold prediction. Henderson and Williams both go over 100 yards. That's from Sage, Ohio on YouTube. I assume, Sage, you meant that they will both go over 100 yards tomorrow, Saturday, against Iowa. Look, it wouldn't be surprising. That's happened already once this year. They both did it against Wisconsin. And, I think they probably could have both done it against Michigan State if they both stayed healthy. They obviously didn't. Mine Williams wasn't available against Michigan State. And then TreVeyon Henderson did go over 100 yards in the first half before getting hurt I think it was the first snap of the third quarter. So, yeah, I mean, look, Iowa's defense is very good. I don't think anyone should sleep on Iowa's defense. But as David said earlier, and if you missed that, David from our 247 Sports Iowa site was on and was great. As he said earlier, what's unfortunate for this Iowa defense is because Iowa's offense is so bad, this defense is on the field over and over and over again. And you've got two running backs like Mayan Williams and TreVeyon Henderson. If they're able to take away some of the passing game, for instance, you can just pound those guys. We've seen it happen at times this year. And yeah, eventually, because Iowa's defense will be on the field so much, I bet they both could break one, and that could lead to them both going over 100 yards. So I think it's a bolder prediction because obviously Iowa's defense is good. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head in terms of their rush defense, but they're very good in general. So, I think that could happen. That could certainly happen. And another one, Mike Schaefer, and we sort of touched on this a little bit with Tim Hall there, but this part of the season worries me. Nobody saw losses to Purdue and Iowa coming, or even Michigan State in 2015. Hopefully the Bucks keep that, quote, competitive stamina. That's the Ryan Day quote, strong all season. Mike, I agree with you. I think you've seen plenty of times in the past Ohio State teams that are rolling, that are playing good, coming into a game, and typically it's been on the road, but you mentioned that Michigan State game, and then that had some weird circumstances to it. But you've seen them go on the road and lose to that Purdue team, lose to that Iowa team. I mean, I don't know if there has been a regular season moment as high as Ohio State was after that Penn State game in 2017. And they just couldn't carry it over into that next week. And I wrote about this earlier this week. You can find it on Bucknuts. The coaching staff now has made it a point to tell the players about that week, because Ryan Day said to, I think it was Ronnie Hickman who was talking about it, that the team they didn't put in the same effort coming off that huge Penn State win. And I think Ryan Day figures that is the best way to show a team that he wants every week to bring it from Tuesday, which is their first day of practice usually, all the way through Saturday when the game's done, that same intensity, regardless of who the opponent is. And you could show them Alabama losing to Tennessee, or USC losing last week, or any team that has been upset this year that's been a good team. And maybe that registers on a good level. But you can also show them guys they know from being in the program, guys that they got to know during recruiting, guys wearing those same jerseys as them, going to Iowa after, I think they moved up to number 3 in the country after that Penn State win, and laying an egg because they didn't prepare correctly. And I think it's a great example. And I think Ryan Day is going to have to continue to hammer this point home week after week that, look, if you take a team lightly, especially on the road in the Big Ten, yeah, you're Ohio State. You have the most talent in the Big Ten, maybe the most talent in the country. That could all go out the window if you lose the wrong game at the wrong time. Obviously, that 2017 team lost twice. They'd also lost to Oklahoma earlier in the year. But if they don't lose that Iowa game and they win out, that team's back in the college football playoff. The year later, Purdue, obviously one-loss team, doesn't make it because of that loss. So, it's college football with the way things are set up right now, a very fickle thing that I think you just have to be careful with. And I think Ryan Day's done a great job managing that thus far. But I think it was smart of him to not just blow off that 2017 Iowa game. He could have done that. He could have said, look, that was 2017. We're a different coaching staff. We have so many different players, this, that, and the other thing. We don't want to talk about that. It could have been done. No one would have talked about it. I wouldn't have written about it. No one else would have written about it. We wouldn't be talking about it right now. Instead, he chose to embrace it. And I think he did that very tactically, because I think not only does it build up some sort of revenge, and Luke Whippler, Ohio State starting center, wasn't on that team, isn't from Ohio, mentioned, look, we all know what happened. We want revenge on this team. He said, anything to get our blood boiling was the quote he used. So in addition to doing that, I think Ryan Day knows this is a great way to make sure this team stays focused. And you can use that throughout the year. It doesn't have to just be this week. I think you can reemphasize that point. Obviously, you won't need it next week against Penn State, but against Nebraska, or against Northwestern, in 2 weeks, against Maryland, those are 2 road games that you should win and probably win convincingly. But you have to handle your business. Just want to look through the comments here real quick. If you have any last questions, we're going to wrap up here shortly. But if you have anything you wanted us to address that we haven't yet, feel free to throw it in the comments if you're watching live here. Here's one from Quaz is fresh. I may have pronounced that wrong. J.K. Johnson better be starting tomorrow. It'll be interesting to see what Ohio State does at cornerback, because the play has not been good enough. I do think Denzel Burke had a better game against Michigan State right before the off weekend. But we've talked about it a lot. I've written about it a lot. It's been rough at times, and there's been too many plays given up. Now you look at Ohio State's pass defense, it's really good statistically, but they also haven't played very many good passing offenses. So I don't know what they'll do. I think if I were betting, I think they give Denzel Burke and Cameron Brown, assuming they're both healthy, a chance to go out there and kind of redeem themselves. I wrote about it this week that Jim Knowles and Ryan Day both really liked what they saw from the cornerbacks in terms of practice the last week plus. And that can do some things. You're obviously going against some really good receivers in practice every day. That's going to test you. So if Cameron Brown, if Denzel Burke have shown that they, learning from the mistakes that they've made, can adjust, turn their head around and knock the ball down, things like that. I think we've seen it from those guys. We've definitely seen it from Denzel Burke, Cameron Brown at points. So these guys are capable of making the plays. I don't know if it's going to matter who starts at cornerback tomorrow on Saturday, I should say, against Iowa, because this is not a passing attack that should concern Ohio State all that much. Though statistically, I guess they do rank higher than almost all, if not all, of Ohio State's. But the tight ends are really the concern in the passing attack, not the receivers. So the cornerbacks shouldn't be tested too much on Saturday. But going to Penn State, going down the road, you've got to go to Maryland and face the younger Tagovailoa brother, assuming he's healthy. You're going to be tested a little bit. So they've got to get the cornerback situation figured out. If that means playing a guy like J.K. Johnson or playing some other guys as opposed to the guys they've been starting, you got to get the right guys on the field. Because, way down the line, assuming everything else goes right, you're going to be in a college football playoff game where the cornerbacks are going to have to defend on an island. And that's got to be better. We're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank everyone who tuned in live. We got a ton of questions. I really love that today. Questions, comments, everything. It's always great to get that from you guys. I want to thank David Eichelholt from our 247 Sports Iowa site. He was great, brought us a lot of insight on Iowa, not only today, but in the future as well. He does great work over there, as I mentioned before. And then Tim Hall, of course. Tim's great. I love Tim and the work he does, The Fan. If you're watching live, I'll be on with Tim and the Buckeye Show Friday evening, so tune in for that. Again, thank you guys for tuning in. This is the Bucknuts Happy Hour. We're heading into week 8 of the college football season. Buckeyes, Iowa, big noon kickoff on Saturday. I hope that you will enjoy it. We'll be there. Steve and I will be in the press box covering the game. So stay tuned to Bucknuts, and cheers to the weekend.